My mother-in-law and father-in-law, they just kicked me out of the only home I've ever known. I have nowhere to go. I don't know what to do. I don't have much money. Luckily, I still have my job. You might ask, how did I end up in this position? Well, my husband passes away, and it seems like my mother-in-law thinks that I'm the devil. Guys, let me walk you through this insane ride. I never thought that I would ever write here, but guess here I am. Anyways, this is a throwaway account because I don't want it to get back to me. I just want to get y'all's opinions and comments on how I handled this situation with my in-laws. It might be a long read, but trust me, with everything that went on, you will understand. Let me give you guys a bit of context first. I'm 32, female, and have been living with my husband's parents for the past 2 years. I've always gotten along with both of my in-laws. My mother-in-law, she can be a bit of a pain sometimes, right? But I've always managed to tolerate her. Anyways, the main reason why my in-laws moved in with us was because they were going through financial difficulties. Yeah, my mother-in-law unfortunately had a bad gambling addiction, which caused her and my father-in-law to accumulate a lot of debt, which they still are paying off to this day. Another reason is that they're a bit elderly, and I guess my husband wanted to have them close by, which meant they moved in with us. Anyways, on to the current day. I'm rushing to the hospital with my in-laws because we just received a call from the hospital, telling us that my husband John had been in a horrible accident. I'm filled with much fear, and I'm praying that he's okay and that nothing horrible has happened to him. My mother-in-law Elizabeth is in the back seat breaking down in tears while my father-in-law George is doing his best to comfort her. I honestly wish I could break down, but I'm trying my best to put up a strong front for my in-laws while hoping that John is alright. We finally get to the hospital, and unfortunately we receive devastating news. All I remember from that night is Elizabeth screaming out in pain while breaking down in tears, and George trying his best not to break down. I also remember waking up in a hospital bed with an IV drip and not being able to remember anything until the doctor explained everything to me again and repeated the very same thing from last night, which changed my whole life. A few days have passed since we received the news at the hospital that my husband died. I've been trying to make the funeral arrangements, but these few days have been extremely tough. I did not just lose my husband, I also lost my best friend and my life partner. The person who I was meant to do life with till we were old and gray, but all of that is gone now at just the age of 35. Just to give you guys a bit more context, I've been married to John for 5 years. We've planned on starting a family this year because I was finally ready, but unfortunately that'll never happen. A part of me regrets putting those plans on hold, and the only reason I held off on having children was because I wanted to focus on my career. John was extremely understanding and supportive of my decision, and his parents did not support it and thought I was being selfish. Maybe I was, because now John passed away without even getting the opportunity to be a father, and he'll have been such an amazing father. I go upstairs, knock on my in-laws' door, and Elizabeth has not come out of the room since we came back from the hospital that night. George told me that she is not doing well at all, and she'll face the world when she's ready. I understand completely, but I need to go over the funeral arrangements with them since the funeral is tomorrow. I waited for a response, but I got none. I decided to try again later and just continue to finalize things for the funeral. After about 20 minutes, Elizabeth comes down and I greet her, and she greets me back, and I ask her how she's holding up. She gives me a cold stare, but responds by saying she's holding up as best as a grieving mother can. I nod my head and just give her a bit of a smile. I ask her if we can go over the program for tomorrow, and she says that we can. I then ask if she, should call George to come join us, and she says that there's no need to call him since he will agree with whatever she agrees with. So, okay. We go over the program, and she had a complaint about every single thing, which I found a bit annoying because I've been doing all this by myself. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind doing it because this was my husband's send-away. But if she wanted to contribute ideas, then she should have at least tried to help me when I was setting it up. I tell her, It's too late to change anything since the funeral is tomorrow. And she just rolls her eyes at me and she says, well, if that's the case, what was the whole point of her coming out of her room? As I'm about to respond to her, she just walks away. The funeral went well and everything ran smoothly, and I truly believe that I gave my husband the send-off that he truly deserved. All his family, friends, and colleagues from work showed up to say their goodbyes, which warmed my heart. John was a really great man, and I know I was not the only one who knew that. The next morning, I find Elizabeth in the kitchen making some breakfast. She seems shocked to see me. She asks me why I'm not at work, and I tell her that I took time off. I find her question a bit odd. Was she really expecting me to jump right back to work after the funeral? George comes down to the kitchen and greets me with a smile, and I greet him back. I tell him that I will be in the study and there are some household bills that I want to sort out. While I was in the study, I received a call from Robert, who was John's best friend. He asks me how I'm doing, and I tell him that I'm taking everything one step at a time. I also thank him for the beautiful speech that he gave yesterday at the funeral, and he tells me that there's no need to thank him. John was his best friend from childhood, and he wanted to make sure that his goodbye message to him was a personal and sentimental one. We chat for a bit, and then he tells me that when I'm ready and once everything has been finalized, I need to come to his office so that we can discuss John's will and estate. Well, I tell him I definitely will let him know, and we say our goodbyes. I actually had not thought about John's will. I mean, he and I were married in a community of property, but he had bought his house before we got married, and I also wondered what he left for his parents since they were basically broke because of Elizabeth's gambling addiction. I know that he would not want me to kick them out of the house, and I would not even dream of doing such. It's my duties to take care of them, and I believe that is what John would have wanted also. I know if the shoes were on the other foot, John would have taken care of my parents, even though Elizabeth has been acting more cold than usual and a bit odd too. She's still my mother-in-law and my family. Update number 1. It's been 2 months since my husband passed away, and what a rough 2 months it's been. I think about him every single day, and I know that they say that time heals all wounds, but it feels like this wound will never heal. I'm busy at work when I received a phone call from Elizabeth asking me to send her money for groceries, which I find odd because I had just bought a month's worth of groceries last month, and I tell her this. And she tells me that what I've bought was trash food, and she doesn't like it. I take a deep breath, and I tell her that is impossible, because I've been buying the same type of groceries since they moved in, and she's never once complained. She proceeds to ask me when they'll be receiving the money from John's estate so that she can go buy her own things and won't have to rely on selfish me. I'm gobsmacked and shocked by her question. I mean, who asks something like that? And as for calling me selfish, I've been nothing but generous and kind towards both her and George. I decide to end the phone call before I say something to her that I will regret. She tries calling me back a few times and then sends me a text message with a fake apology because I know that she's just apologizing, so I send her some money. Normally, I just cave in and give in to what she wants, but today I feel like she's crossed the line. I continue with work, and eventually it's time for me to knock it off. I decided to buy some takeaway for me and my in-laws as a nice gesture, especially because of what happened between me and Elizabeth. I noticed a police car parked outside her house, and I could feel the little hairs on my neck start to flare up. I started feeling anxious and scared. What's going on now? Why would the police be here? I quickly park my car and rush inside, and I just hope, I pray that Elizabeth and George are okay. The area is safe, and there's been no robbery of any sort around here. When I get inside the house, my in-laws were seated on the couch in the living room and talking to 2 police officers. I greet my in-laws, and they don't greet me back, which I find strange. I then asked them what was going on and if everything was okay. No response. One of the police officers greet me and then asked me to take a few steps back away from the victims. Victims? I shake my head and ask the officer what's going on. Elizabeth proceeds to say, "You see, officers, this is usually how it starts." I stare at her in confusion. What does she mean by this is how it normally starts? I can feel myself getting frustrated by the second because no one is explaining anything to me. Elizabeth then says that she and her husband do not feel safe with me in the house and would like for me to be removed from the premises. She also says that this house is in her son's name, and since his estate has not been sorted yet, I have no rights or claim to it. She takes out a document and shows it to the officers. What the hell is this woman doing? She and George don't feel safe around me. What absolute rubbish! I tell the officers that Elizabeth is talking nonsense and that we have all been living together for the past 2 years with absolutely no problems. Elizabeth shakes her head and continues to ask the officers to remove me from the house. My frustration turns into anger, and I yell at her to stop lying and that there's no way in hell she's kicking me out of my late husband's house. She puts up a fake shock, a weird reaction, and starts to get scared. She starts breaking down in tears, and George rubs her back and tells the officers that I have a very short temper fuse, and they feel that I do have anger management issues. I cannot believe what I'm hearing. I look at George and ask him if he's seriously doing this right now, and I can see the guilt in his eyes, but he quickly turns away. The officer proceeds to tell them that Elizabeth has instituted a restraining order against me, and since this house is indeed in their son's name, I have to pack up my belongings and leave. Because according to the restraining order she has, I'm not allowed to be on the same premises. I told the officer that I was not leaving, and this home was also my home. The officer then said that, well, according to the deed, my husband was the sole owner of the property, and until I could prove that I had rights to the house, I have to leave. He also tells me that if I do not decide to leave, they will have no choice but to arrest me for violating the restraining order. I can't believe this. I cannot believe that they would just do this to me. We just buried John 2 months ago, and now they want to kick me out of the one place that has everything of his. I give my in-laws an ice-cold stare and tell them that they will pay for this. I tell the officer that I want to pack my stuff up, then I will leave. Elizabeth proceeds to say that she had already packed up my stuff and that it's in the garage. I bite my tongue and head to the garage, where my stuff is packed up in 2 large suitcases. I know this is not all of my stuff, but for now I'm just going to let this go until I can figure out my next move. The officer accompanied me to my vehicle, and they gave me some legal jargon that they explained was a restraining order. I grab it and drive away. Luckily, I managed to book myself into an Airbnb that's close enough to my workplace. As soon as I entered my room at the Airbnb, I broke down in tears. Never in a million years did I think that my in-laws were capable of doing something so sinister and evil. After everything I've done for them, this is how they repaid me? Kicking me out of my home like I'm some criminal? I can't even believe that Elizabeth claimed that I acted violently towards her in the restraining order. I've never even raised my voice at that woman, even when she would push my buttons. I'm not going to let them get away with this. That house belonged to both me and John, and he always reminded me of that, and I will not let his selfish parents take away our home. Update number 2. It's been a week since my in-laws kicked me out of the house, and I've been going through a roller coaster of emotions. I'd finally arranged a meeting with Robert to discuss everything, including John's estate, which had been finalized. I arrive at Robert's office and I greet him, and he greets me back. I take my seat opposite of him as he finishes up with something on his computer. He asks me how things have been going, and I try my hardest not to cry, but I fail dismally, because as I try to open my mouth to answer his question, tears start falling down from my cheeks. Shocked and confused by my reaction to this question, he hands me some tissues and tries his best to console me. So, I calm down for a bit and I apologize for my outburst of emotions. I take a deep breath, and begin to explain everything that's happened in the last week. I even showed him the restraining order document that I was given. He looks over and just shakes his head, and after I finish telling him everything, he tells me that he's not really shocked that my in-laws pulled such a stunt. I looked at him confused. Because, well, I thought that he had a great relationship with Elizabeth and George. He proceeds to tell me that the restraining order is legit and real, even though Elizabeth did fabricate a whole false story, because none of that claims that she made against me were true. And he doesn't understand why the police would just immediately file a restraining order without at least an investigation. He then proceeds to tell me that John's estate has been sorted and he can now read the will. So, I ask him why Elizabeth and George aren't here for the reading. I know John must have left them something in his estate. Robert tells me that neither Elizabeth nor George are beneficiaries of John's estate. I look at him with confusion and tell him, that's impossible. John had been taking care of his parents financially for the past 2 years, and Robert just coughs and sighs deeply, and he tells me that John always knew what a terrible, manipulative person his mother was. He continues to tell me that the only reason John even allowed his parents to come live with us was because he felt bad for his father. That part I actually understood, and that is one of the reasons I've also sympathized with George. He lost all of his investments and savings because of Elizabeth's gambling addiction. I mean, they lost their house and even cars because of the addiction. The only thing they had left was George's pension, which he would only receive once he turned 65. Elizabeth never had a job and had become a housewife, so she had absolutely no savings. While I'm busy with my thoughts, Robert hands a document over to me, and I ask him, "What is this?" And he told me that it was the new title deed to the house. I look through it and notice that it had my name as the owner. I immediately look up at Robert, and he smiles while nodding his head, and he tells me that in the will, John left the house to me. But that's not all. He left his whole estate to me, and only me. Tears of relief and joy roll down my cheeks, and I can't believe he's left everything to me and left them nothing. Robert tells me that John really loved me and has always wanted me to be financially stable even after he's gone. He knew that if he left anything to his mother, she would just squabble it away. And if he had left anything to his father, he would have just let his mother take control of it because, unfortunately, when it comes to his wife, George does not have a backbone, which is his biggest downfall. Robert tells me that I can get the house back and actually kick out my in-law since the house is in my name. I tell him that I have a better idea. I thank him for everything and rush out of the office to make a quick phone call. Update number 3. Hey guys, it's been a few weeks since I've received the news about John's estate. I decided to buy myself an apartment so that I could stop spending so much money on Airbnbs. Man, they're expensive these days. So, I moved into my new apartment for a few days. There's a knock on my door, and it's my realtor. We greet each other, and she asks me if I'm ready to go to my old house, and I tell her yes I am. We head over to the house where my in-laws kicked me out, and she puts a sold sign up and tells me to let her know when I'm done with the inside. I knock on the door, and luckily it's George who answers. He looks shocked to see me, and I tell him that it is in his best interest to let me inside. He allows me to come inside, and I walk straight into the living room, which they have changed around, and Elizabeth comes rushing into the living room asking George who was at the door. She freezes when she sees me. I greet her with a big smile, and she frowns, and she tells me that I have 10 seconds to get out of her house, or else I'll be leaving here in handcuffs. I laugh and tell her that if she does that, she'll be the one leaving in handcuffs, silly. She looks at me confused, and I tell them that we should all take a seat so that we can discuss John's estate since, it's been finalized for a few weeks now. She tells me, well, that's impossible because Robert did not notify them about this, and I told her that Robert notified me, silly. And there was a good, valid reason why they weren't notified. I take a seat on the couch, and they sit on the couch across from me. Elizabeth is throwing daggers at me with her eyes, and I cough slightly and proceed to tell them that they have about a week to move out of this house because the new owners want to move in next week. They both gasp in shock, and George looks worried. Elizabeth tells me to stop bluffing. There's no way that I would sell the house, especially because it isn't in my name. I take out a document and throw it at them. Elizabeth picks it up, and while she's reading it, I tell them that I have sold the house. It belongs to a lovely couple who were desperate for a home. I tell them that starting next week, this house will have new owners. Elizabeth tries to jump at me, but George pulls her back. She starts to insult me, calling me a selfish pig, and George tells her to shut up, which is the first time I've ever seen him stand up to her. I then proceed to tell them that, unfortunately, John had not left a single cent from his estate for them. Elizabeth yells that I'm a liar and that I've stole her son's money, and she proceeds to call me a gold-digging cow with no morals. I shake my head at her and hand over more documents to George, who scans through them, and I look at Elizabeth and I can't help but laugh. I see Elizabeth absolutely fuming with anger as she also scans through the documents. She gets up and attempts to slap me, but luckily I grab her hand before it reaches me. I tell her that if she dares to try to lay a hand on me again, I will charge her with assault and on top of trespassing since, this is my house. George pulls her back and asks her to please calm down so that we can discuss everything like adults. I tell George that there is not anything to discuss by the end of the week. They need to be out of here. He asks me where they'll go, and I just shrug my shoulders. George pleads for me to be considerate and at least find them a place to stay, but I shake my head and ask him, where are they considerate when they kicked me out of the house? I see guilt written across their faces, and I told them that they kicked me out like a criminal, and not once did they even care to check up on me to see if I was okay. George looks at Elizabeth and demands that she apologizes now, but all she does is roll her eyes. He yells at her like that, and thanks to her, they're now going to be homeless. Even though she's doing her absolute best to put up a strong front, I know that she's scared, but I don't care. They showed me no remorse when they kicked me out of the house and tried to make it seem like I was some violent person. So, I'll show them exactly what they showed me, and I'll also show no remorse. This is the best revenge ever. Update number 4. It's been a few months since I sold the house where I lived with my husband and in-laws. Elizabeth tried so hard to fight it, but the law was on my side and they had to move out. They both tried reaching out to me with endless apologies and promises to change. Elizabeth actually even tried to manipulate me into helping them out by telling me that John would have wanted us to remain a tight unit. But I never responded to either of them. I have not seen them since I've helped escort them out of the house because they were refusing to leave. At first, I felt no remorse or sympathy towards them. I mean, they had kicked me out of my own home. But once I found out that they were staying at a homeless shelter for the elderly, I felt intense guilt, and I decided that even though they had treated me so poorly, I should not allow them to turn my heart of gold into something evil. So I bought them a small, one-bedroom apartment, and Robert helped move them in. As much as I was doing this for them, I still did not want anything to do with them. I told Robert to tell them that the apartment is all that I'm giving them, and they will have to use George's pension to find odd jobs to provide for themselves. I made it clear that they should never contact me again. So far, they've respected my wishes. The last message I received from them, well, I should say George, was him thanking me for getting the apartment despite everything that they've put me through. A part of me, wanted to respond, but I decided not to. Revenge is something easy to do for the faint or good-hearted, even though I knew that my in-laws deserved to suffer for their actions because every evil action has harsh consequences. I still could not see them suffering to that extent, though. Anyways, that's all, guys.
Wow is all I can say. Could you imagine losing your significant other and then being treated absolutely like dirt by their parents when this whole time The father, he didn't even try to help OP out, and he knew what the mother was doing was so wrong. There was a lot of comments down below that were saying, you know what? I would not have bought them that apartment. I don't care if they were rotting on the side of the street. I would not be the one to give them a helping hand after everything that they've done for me. So guys, I do want to know what you think about that. OP has a pretty kind heart, as we saw in this story, going back to help the people that abandoned her. Drop your comments down below. Let's discuss this one in great detail. I'll see you downstairs in the comment section. If you want more daily videos, all you gotta do is hit that subscribe button. My name's Mr. Reddito. I'll catch you in the next one, and remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya!